Good evening. We begin with breaking news of what could be the most significant and devastating military reversal for Russia since the failure of its initial invasion in the spring of 2022. Multiple high-level defense and intelligence sources are confirming to us tonight that elements of the Russian armed forces, numbering in the tens of thousands, have been effectively encircled and cut off in a sprawling pocket of occupied eastern Ukraine. If verified, this represents not just a tactical victory for Ukraine, but a potential strategic catastrophe for the Kremlin, one that could fundamentally alter the course of this war. The location, a critical sector of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, an area Russian forces have spent nearly 10 months grinding to capture at a horrific human cost. The force at risk, according to preliminary NATO and Ukrainian assessments, potentially up to 80,000 Russian personnel. This includes frontline combat troops, support units, and the vital logistical tail that keeps an army in the field. They are now reportedly surrounded with their main supply routes severed. Our map shows the reported area of encirclement. Ukrainian forces executing a meticulously planned and covertly prepared operation are said to have launched a powerful multi-pronged offensive over the past 96 hours, striking not at the strongest Russian fortifications, but at the seams between units and along weakly defended supply corridors. Ukrainian mechanized brigades achieved startling breakthroughs. To the north, they advanced from the direction of the recently liberated city of Lyman. To the south, forces pushed up from the outskirts of Donetsk city, and in a daring long-range thrust, airborne and special operations units reportedly struck deep behind Russian lines to seize key road and rail junctions. The pincers, we are told, have closed. The cities of Sadov, Kremenina, and the devastated town of Rubishny are now at the center of what military analysts are preliminarily calling the Donbass pocket. The implications are staggering. An encirclement of this scale has not been seen in European warfare since the Second World War. It threatens to annihilate a significant portion of Russia's remaining effective combat power in the east. It puts at risk the very territorial gains that Vladimir Putin used to justify his illegal annexation of these regions just months ago. And it sends a thunderous message to the world. The Ukrainian military, armed with Western weapons and hardened by a brutal winter of defense, is not just holding the line. It is now capable of orchestrating large-scale, complex offensive operations to decisively defeat the Russian army. Tonight, we will detail this breaking report, the intelligence behind it, the geography of the trap, the forces involved, and the potential catastrophic outcomes for Russia. We will also examine the critical questions. How did Ukrainian intelligence and planning achieve this? What does this mean for the future of the war? And what desperate options does the Kremlin now have to respond? To understand the magnitude of this potential encirclement, we must first understand the battlefield that preceded it. For months, this sector has been the scene of a brutal war of attrition. Russian forces, spearheaded by Wagner Group mercenaries and convict-led Storm Z units, conducted a relentless artillery-heavy assault on the city of Bakhmut. The goal was simple: seize it, claim a propaganda victory, and create a springboard for further advances deeper into Donetsk. But this focus on Bakhmut, analysts now believe, created a fatal strategic blindness. As Russia poured its best remaining assault troops and the bulk of its artillery ammunition into the fight for a single city, a fight that has been described as a meat grinder, it stretched its forces thin across a vast front line elsewhere. Its units in the spat of Kremenna sector were often second-rate, poorly motivated mobilized reservists, under-strength regiments from the Far East, and exhausted troops rotated from the Bakhmut carnage. Their mission was static defense, holding ground already captured. This is a classic case of operational fatigue and poor command focus. The Russian high command, likely fixated on the symbolic prize of Bakhmut, failed to adequately reinforce the shoulders of their own salient. They created a bulge in their lines, a protrusion of occupied territory that is inherently vulnerable to attacks on its flanks. Ukrainian intelligence, with superior ISR intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance from Western partners, would have seen this vulnerability for months. They didn't just see a line on a map. They saw a massive, slow-moving target. Ukrainian planning, sources indicate, was a masterclass in operational security and deception, or maskirovka. While the world's attention was on Bakhmut And while Western analysts debated where a spring offensive might fall, Zaporizhia perhaps, or south toward Melitop, Ukraine quietly assembled its decisive force elsewhere. Newly formed assault brigades equipped with modern Western armor like Leopard 2 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles were trained and held in reserve. Their movement to the launch points was conducted at night under radio silence with heavy use of camouflage. The offensive itself, initiated earlier this week, did not begin with a massive artillery barrage that would telegraph the main effort. Instead, it began with widespread and disruptive attacks by Ukrainian long-range weapons, HIMARS, and Storm Shadow missiles, striking command posts, ammunition depots, and key bridges dozens of kilometers behind the front. This paralyzed Russian command and crippled their ability to shift reserves. Then the ground assault. Reports described not one, but three powerful synchronized thrusts. In the north, a combined force of mechanized infantry and tanks exploiting weak spots identified by drone surveillance smashed through Russian defensive lines near the Oskol River. Their objective, drive south and east, cutting the P-66 highway, the main Russian supply artery running from the border town of Troitsky down to Kremenina. Simultaneously, in the south, another Ukrainian force attacked from the vicinity of Bakhmut's northern flank. This group's mission was to push northward, meeting the northern pincer and sealing the bottom of the pocket. But the most audacious move, according to intelligence intercepts, was a deep operation by Ukrainian special forces and air assault troops. Using night vision and exploiting gaps, they infiltrated behind Russian lines. Their target, the critical T-1302 highway junction near the town of Starbalisk. If they hold that ground, they have effectively slammed shut the back door. On the ground, the situation is described as chaotic, but increasingly desperate for the Russians. Intercepted communications, which have increased dramatically in volume and panic, reveal units reporting they are cut off, surrounded, and running low on everything. One intercepted message from a Russian battalion commander simply states, "They are everywhere. We cannot move." What are our orders? The promised orders, it seems, are not coming. Who exactly is trapped? Pinpointing the exact order of battle is difficult amidst the fog of war, but defense officials have provided a sketch. Inside the developing pocket are believed to be the remnants of several badly mauled Russian divisions and brigades. This includes elements of the 3rd Army Corps, a formation hastily stood up last summer and known to be plagued with equipment and morale problems. Also present are regiments from the 20th and 144th Motor Rifle Divisions, units that have been in constant combat since the war's early days and are likely severely depleted. Intermingled with them are the so-called DNR and LNR militias forces from the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. These troops are often less equipped and trained than regular Russian forces, but they are fighting on their home terrain. Most significantly, intelligence suggests a large concentration of Russian artillery and logistical support is now inside the pocket. This is the key to understanding the potential scale of the disaster. An army moves on its stomach and fights with its ammunition. These trapped units include the vital trucks, fuel tankers, field kitchens, mobile repair units, and most importantly, the ammunition depots that supply the massive volume of shells needed for Russian tactics. A conservative estimate based on pre-offensive satellite imagery of supply dumps and unit positions suggests the pocket could contain 45,000 to 55,000 combat and combat support troops. An additional 25,000 plus logistical, engineering, and rear echelon personnel. Hundreds of tanks and armored fighting vehicles now unable to maneuver or retreat. Several hundred artillery pieces from howitzers to multiple rocket launchers, which will quickly become silent without a steady flow of shells. Mountains of stored ammunition, fuel, and food that can no longer be distributed forward and are now vulnerable to Ukrainian precision strikes. This is the ticking clock. Without resupply, a modern army begins to die within days. Food runs out, medical supplies are exhausted. Vehicles grind to a halt as fuel reserves dry up. And crucially, artillery batteries, Russia's primary advantage, fire their last shells. Once silent, they become useless metal, and the encircled infantry loses its protective firepower. Ukraine's strategy, therefore, may not be an immediate, costly frontal assault to destroy the pocket. Military analysts suggest it will be a methodical reduction. Ukrainian forces will continue to strengthen their defensive rings, digging in to repel any Russian relief attempts. They will use drones and long-range artillery to precisely target command vehicles, parked equipment, and any visible supply stockpiles inside the pocket. They will wait, tightening the noose as morale, supplies, and combat power within the cauldron dwindle. The goal is not just to defeat these troops, but to force their surrender to achieve a catastrophic political and propaganda defeat for the Kremlin broadcast to the world. This is where Putin faces his Dunkirk, but without a channel to escape across. His trapped forces have only three grim options, all terrible. One, a mass surrender, which would be the largest of the war and a humiliation he cannot abide. Two, a desperate, bloody breakout attempt which would likely turn into a slaughter against prepared Ukrainian defenses. Or three, a slow, agonizing degradation, starved, bombarded, and picked apart until the units simply cease to exist as fighting formations. For a commander-in-chief who has staked his reputation and his regime's stability on being a strong man, there are no good choices here, only varying degrees of disaster. The reverberations from this potential encirclement are being felt far beyond the muddy fields of Donbass. In world capitals, the assessment is shifting in real time. In Brussels and Washington, there is a palpable sense of vindication mixed with urgent recalculation. The provision of Western weapons systems from HIMARS to modern tanks to advanced intelligence has just demonstrated a tangible war-winning return on investment. Conversations about providing F-16 fighter jets, longer-range ATACMS missiles, and additional armored vehicles once mired in caution will now accelerate dramatically. The argument that support for Ukraine is a bottomless pit is shattered. The argument that it is a strategic investment yielding decisive results is proven. Conversely, in Moscow, the political atmosphere is described as toxic and panicked. Putin has built a system that cannot tolerate public failure. The state media narrative of a steady, successful special military operation has just collided with the potential of an 80,000-man catastrophe. How will the Kremlin spin this? Will they admit the scale of the loss? Will they blame traitors, NATO, or incompetent generals? This level of failure threatens to crack the carefully maintained facade of control, potentially igniting long-simmering tensions between the Russian Ministry of Defense, the Wagner Group, and the nationalist war party bloggers who have grown increasingly critical. The economic and manpower consequences are equally dire for Russia. The loss of the equipment in the pocket would represent a material blow that its struggling industrial base, hampered by sanctions, cannot quickly replace. But the loss of the men would be existential. Russia has already suffered an estimated 150,000 to 200,000 casualties. Adding tens of thousands more killed, wounded, or captured in a single operation would hollow out its professional army, forcing another even more unpopular and destabilizing round of mobilization. Where do you find another 80,000 men? And what does the Russian public, which has been sheltered from the worst realities of the war, say when the scale of this defeat becomes impossible to hide? Finally, this changes the diplomatic landscape. Ukraine enters any future negotiation from a position of profound demonstrated strength. The goal of liberating all its territory, once seen by some as aspirational, now appears as a realistic military objective. For nations like China and India, which have attempted to balance relations with Russia and the West, the calculation shifts. Backing a losing horse, no matter the historical friendship, becomes a less attractive geopolitical proposition. The message to the global South is clear. The military and technological might of the NATO alliance, channeled through Ukrainian courage and skill, can and is defeating one of the world's largest standing armies. The world is watching, and the balance of power is visibly tilting. Beyond the maps and the troop estimates lies the human reality of this encirclement. For the tens of thousands of Russian soldiers inside the pocket, the world has suddenly shrunk to a few square kilometers of frozen Ukrainian earth. Their experience, pieced together from intercepted communications and the testimony of recent defectors, is one of accelerating desperation. The initial shock of being cut off has given way to a grinding anxiety. Units report their supply deliveries have stopped. The constant thump of artillery, once a comfort as their own guns fired, has become sporadic and is now falling silent as shells run out. Drone footage, too sensitive to broadcast, shows columns of armored vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles abandoned on roadsides out of fuel. Soldiers are seen digging deeper into the mud, not to advance, but to find shelter from the precision-guided munitions and surveillance drones that now hover with impunity. The most critical shortage is medical. Intercepted pleas from medics describe field hospitals overwhelmed with supplies of blood, antibiotics, and painkillers exhausted. Wounded soldiers cannot be evacuated. The weather is turning. Without regular food deliveries, troops are scavenging from abandoned Ukrainian homes or relying on dwindling combat rations. The phrase complete encirclement on a general's map translates for the infantrymen to cold hunger and the terrifying knowledge that there is no way out. This potential catastrophe must be viewed in the context of losses that were already staggering before this operation began. Independent Russian investigative outlets using public records like obituaries and relative social media posts have confirmed the identities of nearly 80,000 Russian soldiers killed since the full-scale invasion began. Kyiv's estimates of total Russian casualties killed, wounded, captured exceed 700,000. Western intelligence has consistently noted that Russian forces have suffered huge losses in both troops and equipment. The destruction of this pocket could see the confirmed death toll climb by tens of thousands in a matter of weeks. A loss of life on a scale not seen in Europe for generations. In Moscow, the political and military establishment is facing its gravest crisis since the failed drive on Kiev in 2022. The problem for the Kremlin is not just military, but existential to its narrative of control and inevitable victory. President Vladimir Putin has built an information fortress. Just days ago at the Defense Ministry Board, he declared that the Russian army firmly holds the strategic initiative along the entire front line. He boasted of liberating over 300 settlements in 2025 and claimed Russian troops are advancing with confidence and grinding down the hostile forces. He detailed the deployment of new nuclear-capable systems like the Archnik missile and spoke of expanding security buffer zones. The message was one of relentless, managed strength. Now that carefully constructed image is collapsing, the immediate challenge is how does the state media apparatus report this? They cannot ignore the disappearance of an entire army group. Early clumsy attempts are emerging. Russian chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, recently claimed up to 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers were encircled, a claim immediately denied by Kyiv and doubted by analysts. We are now seeing this script flipped. Pro-Kremlin channels are beginning to frame the trapped Russian forces not as victims of a defeat, but as a heroic holding action, deliberately tying down vast Ukrainian resources. It is a desperate pivot from claiming offensive momentum to praising sacrificial defense, rattling and a redoubled accusation that NATO is fighting a proxy war. The families of the soldiers trapped inside the pocket will be met not with information, but with a wall of silence or propaganda. The internal tension between the military command, the Wagner faction, and the Kremlin will reach a boiling point. Someone will be scapegoated for this disaster. The ripple effects of this encirclement are already destabilizing the global diplomatic chessboard. The conflict has entered a new, more volatile phase. First in Washington and European capitals, the staggering success of Ukrainian arms is a powerful vindication for the policy of military support. The debate shifts instantly from can Ukraine win to how fast can we get them, what they need to finish the job. Conversations about F-16 fighter jets, longer-range ATAC-EMS missiles, and other advanced systems will move from theoretical planning to urgent delivery schedules. The argument that supporting Ukraine is a strategic investment in European security has just received its most powerful evidence. Second, the peace talks. The Trump administration has been engaged in a months-long push for peace with talks described as proceeding constructively. This development fundamentally alters the leverage at that table. Ukraine now negotiates from a position of demonstrated overwhelming battlefield success. Russia's maximalist demands, likely including the recognition of annexed territories, become untenable. As one European official noted, dialogue with Moscow becomes conceivable only when tied to a solid and lasting peace for Ukraine. That prospect just moved much closer because of Ukrainian military action, not diplomacy. Third, the frontline reality. To understand the pressure on Putin, look beyond the pocket to the broader Donbass front. For over 18 months, Russian forces have been engaged in a grinding attritional battle for the city of Pokrovsk. They have amassed an estimated 170,000 troops in the region, outnumbering Ukrainian defenders by as much as 8-1. Despite paying a horrific cost, Ukraine estimates 200,000 Russian casualties in the Donetsk sector. This year alone, they have inched forward. Now, the potential loss of a force half that size in a single stroke threatens to unravel not just the Popovsk offensive, but the stability of the entire Russian line in the east. Commanders will be terrified of moving reserves to plug gaps for fear of creating new vulnerabilities. We are now at the precipice. The coming days and weeks will dictate the course of the next year of this war. There are three primary paths forward, each with profound consequences. This is the most likely and most decisive outcome. Ukrainian forces continue their methodical reduction of the pocket. Without supplies, Russian resistance crumbles, morale breaks. What begins as scattered sereners turns into a flood. We could see the capture of 20,000, 30,000 or more Russian troops, a humiliation of historic proportions, broadcast live to the world. The Russian units left on the flanks, demoralized and unsupported, would be forced into a panicked, wholesale retreat. Ukraine would regain a massive swath of territory in a matter of days, potentially reaching the borders Russia held before its February 2022 invasion. The political shock in Moscow could be regime-threatening. The Kremlin, unable to accept surrender, orders a desperate relief operation. It would be a frontal assault against fortified Ukrainian positions, a modern-day charge of the Light Brigade. It would require sacrificing other parts of the front and could result in catastrophic losses for the relief force, potentially doubling the disaster. Even if a narrow corridor is punched through, the escaping forces would be mauled by artillery and drones, leaving behind their heavy equipment. It would be a tactical retreat at the cost of strategic ruin, the least likely but most grim possibility. Russian command decides to supply the pocket by air, a near impossible task given Ukrainian air defenses. The trapped army is told to hold at all costs, becoming a besieged fortress. The fighting descends into a static, horrific battle of attrition within the encirclement, like a 21st century Stalingrad in miniature. This would prolong the agony and the bloodshed, but would only delay the inevitable outcome. Tonight, the world is witnessing the unfolding of a military catastrophe for Russia and a strategic masterpiece by Ukraine. The 80,000 trapped is not just a number. It is the potential pivot point of this war. It proves that Ukrainian courage combined with Western technology and intelligence can not only stop the Russian war machine, but dismember it, exposes the fatal weakness behind Putin's facade of strength. An army stretched thin, poorly led, and now potentially decimated. The message from the frozen fields of Donbass is clear. The era of Russian irreversible gains is over. The initiative has decisively shifted. The questions now are not about if Ukraine can defend itself, but how far and how fast it can liberate its land and what price a cornered Kremlin will try to exact on the world stage in response to its defeat. The coming hours are critical. We will be here watching and reporting. For all of us at Rachel Maddow Insight, thank you and good.